2016 was not a good year for movies. 2015 was a letdown after the great year that was 2014, but 2016 was a rough slog of sub-mediocrity with a gut punch of a summer movie season right in the middle. There were some great smaller releases in the February to April pre-summer period, and of course there were some solid awards contenders in the final few months in an overall disappointing awards season, but by and large, of the 180 movies I saw from 2016, including the limited release that got wide release in January 2017, which there were like 9 of, I would only recommend roughly 60 of them. Today, I'm arranging the diamonds from the rough and the bottom of the barrel, my top 10 best and worst movies of 2016. If you're curious on my ranking of all 180 movies, then there's a link to my list on Letterboxd in the description. Alright, without any further ado, here we go. As you could probably take from my preamble, I'm not the most enthusiastic about my top 10 this year. I'd say all of these are great movies, but in years past, I doubt numbers 9 and 10 would be in my top 15. But before going in, here are numbers 26 through 11 to give you some perspective on what didn't make the cut. Hail Caesar, Maggie's Plan, The BFG, Fences, Hidden Figures, Hacksaw Ridge, Moonlight, The Witch, Arrival, Ouija, Origin of Evil, The Jungle Book, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Shin Godzilla, Moana, Star Trek Beyond, The Edge of 17. And now, my top 10 favorite movies of 2016. Of all the genres, horror probably fared the best in 2016. Ouija, Origin of Evil was a prequel to the generically bad 2014 original, and was a pleasant surprise with stylish direction in its period detail, not only in production design, but also in visual presentation. The Conjuring 2 was entertaining and a solid sequel that I found to be just as good as the first. The Witch was a thoughtful and unsettling observation of the breakdown of a family unit under the pressures of religious fundamentalism. Don't Breathe was a lot of fun as a tribute to low-budget, sleazy grindhouse exploitation pictures, and The Purge election year was a bit of a guilty pleasure for me, when it was actually being an action movie. The best horror film of the year, however, was easily writer-director Jeremy Saulnier's Green Room, starring Patrick Stewart, Imogen Poots, and the late Anton Yelchin. A miserable little rock band called The Ain't Rights are on tour in the Northwest when they take a gig at a neo-Nazi punk club in the woods of northern Oregon. As you can imagine, something horrible goes down, which leads our wayward protagonists trying everything they can to escape the den of a pack of neo-Nazis led by Patrick Stewart as the club's owner. I wouldn't call Green Room a horror film so much as a midnight movie situational thriller, but the moments of grisly violence definitely place it firmly in the horror camp for most people. Saulnier's screenplay does a really good job of making his characters behave in situations the way I imagine most people would, and I mean that on both sides. Smart and stupid decisions are made in the moment and have rewards and consequences that build tension in a supremely organic fashion. The what would you do projection factor that makes survival movies so appealing to me is cranked up here, and the grimy aesthetic is magnificent. As somebody who lives in Portland, Oregon, I think the filmmakers captured a landscape I see practically every day of my life in a manner I've never considered. It's chilling, chilling stuff. I haven't seen Saulnier's previous features, Murder Party and Blue Ruin, but Green Room is more than enough to make me check them out. Number 9. Disney Animation has been on a roll for a few years, both financially and with critics. I still haven't managed to get around to seeing Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, or Frozen, and I wasn't that big, pardon the pun, on Big Hero 6. But 2016 was the year it feels I finally got on the same page as Disney Animation. Moana was a blast, and Zootopia was the best animated film I saw this year in a thoroughly mixed year for the subgenre. A neat analogy for prejudice and discrimination of all kinds, but mostly racism and sexism, blends nicer than I had anticipated with the stock noir mystery structure and character archetypes, and because of the solid subtext, those stock character archetypes and plot structure elevate into something I found kind of special for mainstream animated fare. There's not much to say here other than it does what it does with style and class, and everything just sort of clicks into place in a natural way. Everybody's seen Zootopia at this point, and while the third act has a couple missteps, it's a place I hope to visit again. Oh, and yeah, the animation's beautiful. Number 8. Every year it seems there's a great movie that comes around that everybody seems to laud before inexplicably turning their back on and hating for the rest of eternity. In 2013 it was American Hustle. In 2014 it was one of my favorite movies of all time, Boyhood. Last year it was Star Wars The Force Awakens, which I guess everybody seriously hates now, and this year it was the marvelous La La Land. Damien Chazelle's musical follow-up to the incredible Whiplash wasn't quite as amazing as I wanted it to be. It was my most anticipated movie of the year after all, but it was still great, and I found it more satisfying on rewatches and works even better as a companion piece to Whiplash. It is slightly uneven in its second act, but the escapist joy attached to the romantic ideas we all have of achieving our dreams are matched with a sobering swig of real-world disappointment in a film about the optimistic yet melancholic parallel between the pursuit of one's interests as a sustainable career and the pursuit of a loving relationship, and the mature, honest reality that one will most likely come at the expense of the other. The film's beating heart gives an infectious, inspirational spirit to the viewer, and Chazelle's skill as a director makes it look so easy. I feel like getting up and making a movie the second after leaving. The cinematography is vibrant, the framing of the CinemaScope canvas is masterfully handled, Chazelle's knack for visual storytelling makes him one of the most exciting directors in the business, and the staging of such a large project is, once again, inspiring. Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling are so charming. They do a lot to make these legitimately interesting characters more likable than they probably read on the page. I should probably mention the songs, too. I think they're nice, but they didn't start to work for me until a second viewing, and I realized just how integral they were thematically. Number 7. It probably goes without saying, but this is my list of personal favorite films of the year, as opposed to what I think are the greatest. But if this were the greatest, my 7th favorite film, Martin Scorsese's Silence, would probably be in the top 3. A haunting, thoughtful, psychologically brutal meditation on the nature and implications of faith, Scorsese gave us a passion project he's been wanting to deliver for over 2 decades, and it was well worth the wait. It's a shame then that nobody went to check out the tale of Andrew Garfield and Adam Driver as Portuguese padres who traveled to 1670 Japan to minister to the Christian minority while in search of their missing mentor played by Liam Neeson. Even more shameful, it got robbed of just about everything at the Academy Awards. Crying shame. Surprising probably nobody, the film is expertly crafted and filled with bold creative decisions that will turn many people off. Silence struck a chord with me that I don't think I felt in a movie theater before. It felt as though I was in a room with Martin Scorsese as he talked at length about his complicated feelings on his faith. And as somebody who has had similar quandaries about their faith, I was reminded about the power film has to connect with people, which more than makes up for the unevenness that is present throughout. Maybe I'm just projecting, but for a cinematic experience that has so much respect and asks so much from its audience, I was impressed, surprised, and challenged, and as a result felt more and more rewarded in the days after leaving the screening. Number 6. As I mentioned earlier, the 2016 summer movie season was a bust. Aside from a few surprises here and there, it felt like death by 1,000 uninspired mediocre blockbusters. Even then, a couple of the pleasant surprises were actually unseen by most audiences. Case in point, Shane Black's The Nice Guys. Ryan Gosling had the best year, didn't he? Well, probably second best behind Mahershala Ali. The Nice Guys rocked. Shane Black is a creative force who feels fresh, unique, and original, mostly because he is, but also because he's like a relic of an era of entertainment gone by, reminding us how they don't make them like they used to. While I have yet to see Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, it's apparent from Iron Man 3 and now The Nice Guys that Black is the king of placing sharp, intelligent political social commentary into the most fun you'll have at a theater. You're having such a blast, you'd be forgiven for thinking it wasn't smart. It's like we're conditioned to think that something has to be either fun or smart, but Black's respect for his audience gives the viewer high incentive for repeat viewings. Now let's address the things that make it all work. Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling. These two actors in these two roles are brilliant, interesting, and could carry an entire movie on their own, but the layers Black unfolds by pairing them together is inspired. Gosling's Holland March is a manic-depressant, single-father private investigator with the worst string of luck you could imagine, and Crowe's Jackson Healy is a loner, off-the-book, muscle-for-hire who's become content with his life having no significance. Oh, and it's a comedy. Angourie Rice turns in the Best Child Actor Performance of the Year. The dialogue is snappy and razor sharp. The 1970s Los Angeles setting is a visual marvel photographed by Felipe Rosalat, and the whole affair deserves to be seen. Please, please, please check out The Nice Guys if you're interested in a buddy detective mystery action comedy period piece. Number 5. Blockbusters in 2016 sucked a lot, especially in the summer. But the year's best blockbuster kicked off the summer movie season and proved just how great franchise entertainment can be. Captain America Civil War blew me away. Not only is this easily my favorite Marvel Studios movie, but I'd put Civil War in the top 5 greatest comic book superhero movies, period. Everybody's seen this movie and has their decided opinion, so I'll keep this brief. Captain America Civil War is a fascinating story of two men with strong will and convictions who are in the worst possible headspace to be having an argument, but are having a feud. Steve Rogers, Captain America, is grieving over the death of one of the final remnants of his time, and Tony Stark, Iron Man, is feeling the crushing guilt of the seeming carelessness of his actions, and the two are connected by the idea of consequence. This conflict is given a larger stage as the Avengers team is split over a global political disagreement, and the ignored consequences of their actions is personified as the mysterious Zemo, an emotionally intelligent, compelling tale of tragedy, grief, guilt, consequences, justice, and vengeance. Captain America Civil War delivered the large-scale epic thrills we want out of a blockbuster, but also delved into a more intimate and personal look that left me not knowing how to feel, in a good way, the first time I saw it. Not to mention, Black Panther is the coolest guy ever, and I cannot wait to see a solo movie in 2018, and it was pretty cool to see the new Spider-Man. Number 4. We lost a lot of great talents in 2016. From musicians like David Bowie, George Michael, and Prince, to comic book legends like Darwin Cook and Steve Dillon, it seemed nobody was safe, least of all in Hollywood. We lost Carrie Fisher, and then her mother Debbie Reynolds a day later. We lost Gene Wilder, we lost Anton Yelchin, Gary Marshall, and Gary Shandling, among many others. One of the saddest deaths for me was the passing of Alan Rickman. Most people my age will probably remember him as Professor Severus Snape from the Harry Potter franchise, and he was excellent in that role, but he was also among the best actors in every movie he was in, and it was bittersweet to be able to say goodbye to him in Gavin Hood's exceptional drone warfare thriller, Eye in the Sky. Helen Mirren, Alan Rickman, Aaron Paul, and Barkhad Abdi led the Best Ensemble of the Year in this little movie that practically nobody saw nor talked about, which is a shame because it's the sort of film I think would connect with a lot of people across the political spectrum, mostly because it has its focus on the moral and ethical quandaries of drone warfare more so than the politics, which are played more for dark comedic relief. Director Gavin Hood handles this project with a lot of care. The tonal shifts, pacing, and balance of characters is expertly realized, and while not as good, there were elements of Eye in the Sky which reminded me of a more serious approach to something like Kubrick's Doctor Strangelove. It's hard to talk about this movie because so much of the tension comes from the way the central situation plays out, so please check this one out. It's amazing. Number 3. Making a movie that stands out is extremely difficult. I mean, with the sheer amount of film coming out independently, to theaters, on VOD, iTunes, streaming services such as Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, etc., how do you even pitch something that somebody will remember? Everything needs a gimmick, it seems, and while I have no issues with gimmickry, The Twilight Zone is my favorite television show for crying out loud, it's refreshing when a movie comes around that is so cool, it doesn't need no gimmick, no glitz, no glitter, no funny business, just comes in, tells a story straight up, and gets out. And may leave something in your brain to chew on for days and days and days. Hell or High Water is that movie, and my pick for best screenplay of the year, just nudging out The Nice Guys. This late summer surprise was thankfully a success story at the box office, and I'm glad it's getting the recognition I think it deserves this award season, which is something I cannot say about my top 2 movies. What's the story? Chris Pine and Ben Foster are a couple of brothers in Texas who are robbing a chain of banks, and Jeff Bridges plays a ready-for-retirement police officer trying to catch them. There's a little more to it than that, but not much, and boy does this crime western know what it's doing. What makes Taylor Sheridan's script so great to me is you could give it to 4 different directors and get 4 largely different experiences, whether they be aesthetically, thematically, or character-wise, depending on what the director has on their focus. David Mackenzie clearly has his mind on the ownership of land, which he makes the central theme, and the stellar shot composition is filled with long takes featuring wide landscapes. Packed to the brim with great dialogue, memorable characters, both primary and secondary, riveting set pieces, a clear understanding of setting, and especially its deep thematic undertones on the nature of land and ownership, Hell or High Water is the best cat and mouse chase I've seen in years, something deep and entertaining in equal measure. Number 2. Coming in at number 2 is a movie that definitely makes this a favorite list rather than a greatest. Not to say I have any ill will against my pick or that I think my pick is in any way shallow, mindless entertainment, but my pick for number 2 is pretty much only this high because it appeals to me specifically in ways only it can. I am, of course, talking about Richard Linklater's Everybody Wants Some. Coming to us roughly 20 months after the masterful Boyhood, Linklater's latest offering, billed as a spiritual successor to Dazed and Confused, was released nearly a full 14 years after its supposed predecessor, and I couldn't think of a better time for this to appear on Linklater's filmography. Everybody Wants Some takes place over the course of 72 hours as Jake, a college freshman baseball pitcher, arrives at the school's baseball houses and bonds with his teammates before beginning classes. These jocks party, grill each other at every turn, and are of course in constant search of getting laid and getting wasted. And that's really all there is on a plot level here. But because it's Richard Linklater we're talking about here, the whole thing is a hell of a lot deeper and more thoughtful than it initially appears. The thing about Linklater as a filmmaker that draws me to him is how he handles movies with loose or non-existent plots that are character-driven, but also more ensemble pieces that no single character is ever really the focus. We learn from everybody. He's breaking all the rules almost all the time, constantly experimenting with the form. And where so many other writers and directors stumble on the story level, Linklater makes it all work and be not boring. I love hanging out with these guys in this movie, even though I would probably hate their company in reality. Linklater's characters are all flawed, but they're also all human, and this is a writer who loves his characters despite their flaws and in turn makes us care for them too. I think a lot of this emotional intelligence comes from the man himself. Little Richard grew up in Texas playing baseball in school before becoming a filmmaker, so his perspective is refreshingly nuanced and joyously open-minded. In that respect, Everybody Wants Some is maybe the most Richard Linklater-y movie Richard Linklater has ever made. Whether it be Dazed and Confused, School of Rock, Boyhood, or Everybody Wants Some, I love watching his films. They give me a feeling and experience no other artist does. I genuinely want to pursue becoming a better person after watching his movies. He makes the movies I wish I could, but know I never can. Wonderfully nostalgic, joyous, open-minded, and hilarious with great characters, please see Everybody Wants Some as soon as you possibly can. Oh, and the soundtrack is killer, but you already knew that. Number 1. I dislike trailers. Some trailers are awesome, like Star Wars The Force Awakens or Logan, but generally speaking, I dislike trailers and usually enter the theater 15 or so minutes late because it's no skin off my nose if I miss 4 blockbuster trailers all following the same editing template, or the 3rd critical indie darling trailer in a week where soft rock plays over hyperbolic quotes from reviews. But because of the amount of movies I see, I do end up watching a lot of trailers and end up straining my eyes before the movie can even start from the amount of times I roll my eyes. Trailers are also not a great gauge for what a movie really is most of the time, because there are a number of films I've seen that the trailers did what they could for incredibly hard-to-market movies that turned out to be pretty good, but different than what I got from the trailers, like 20th Century Women and The Wolf of Wall Street. But I guess I should be happy that I watch pretty much every movie that comes to my theater, because if I had only seen the trailer for my favorite movie of the year, then I wouldn't have seen it. And I certainly wasn't expecting Sing Street to be the best movie of the year, let alone one of the best movies I've ever seen. But that's just what happened. Sing Street is the only 10 out of 10 I've given a movie since Boyhood in 2014. I've seen it about 5 times in the less than 1 year that it's been in release. I have the poster hanging up in my room, and I own the soundtrack on vinyl record. I love Sing Street. Connor Lawler is a teenager in 1985 Dublin, Ireland, whose family is hit by a financial crisis and is moved to a rough public Catholic school and starts a band to attract the girl he has a crush on who lives across the street. Sounds formulaic, I know, but this movie broke through me and reminded me of the power that the film medium has. This is a movie that cannot exist in any other form of art, and the power of these images brought me to tears. I was a wreck, shaking and crying for the final 45 minutes the first time I saw the movie, and I still haven't managed to get through the Drive It Like You Stole It prom sequence without tears. Perfection. Without a doubt, it deserves to be remembered among the greatest all-time movie scenes. Unfortunately, I don't think many people are going to have the same reaction I did, what with me talking it up and it having as many fans who got to see it early in order to talk it up, but that's okay. I'm glad I have that experience. A perfect movie doesn't need a big budget, doesn't need A-list stars, nor does it need a huge box office return. A great movie can come from anywhere, and here it comes from a great idea of taking the journey to artistic understanding and framing it as a coming-of-age story. It's a brilliant conceit that writer-director John Carney explores thoroughly and efficiently. But that's not all there is to it. The film perfectly understands the romanticized worldview of ambitious youth, yet also understands the cruelty of the real world these people inhabit. Connor's drive for great art comes from a place of adversity and real-world pain. It's incredible. If that sounds sort of familiar, like La La Land, then you just stumbled into my biggest disappointment when I first saw La La Land. Not only did I see it first in Sing Street earlier in the year, I saw it so much better and more emotionally engaging in Sing Street earlier in the year. How have I not mentioned the songs? The film has a soundtrack of the 80s classic that inspired Connor and his band, but the original songs that Sing Street, the band, perform are even better. I cannot fathom how not a single one of these didn't get a Best Original Song nomination at the Academy Awards, but it's absolutely ridiculous, and Drive It Like You Stole It should have won the category. It's the Lego Batman and Best Animated Feature all over again. Long story short, Sing Street is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's on Netflix right now, so please do yourself the favor of checking it out, even if you don't like it as much as I did. All told, 2016 was a rough year, but I don't wish it never happened. A world without 2016 means a world without Sing Street, and that's a world I just don't want to live in. Alright, time to cut the crap and have my final say on the numerous cinematic dumpster fires we got this year. But holy cow, is 10 just not enough to contain the awful. So here are my runners-up for Worst Movie of the Year. Ben-Hur, How to Be Single, Bad Santa 2, The Free State of Jones, Man Down, Office Christmas Party, Mechanic Resurrection, 9 Lives, Incarnate, The Disappointments Room, Dirty Grandpa, Norm of the North, Our Kind of Traitor, Shut In, The Fifth Wave, Meet the Blacks, The Wildlife, Mother's Day, Ratchet and Clank. How do you like that? Terrible movies like Michael Bay's 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, and Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice weren't even in that long list of runners-up. 2016 sucked. Whatever, here we go with the top 10. Number 10. Yeesh, the action movies this year were pretty bad. Allegiant, Mechanic Resurrection, The Huntsman Winter's War, The Legend of Tarzan, Independence Day Resurgence, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows, the aforementioned 13 Hours. I could go on all day. Nothing says I'm disposable, forgettable, and ultra-generic, quite like a bad action movie, and you'll be seeing multiple on this bottom list. But let's kick it off with the incompetently stupid Criminal, starring Kevin Costner, Gary Oldman, Tommy Lee Jones, Ryan Reynolds, Gal Gadot, and Alice Eve. What a dud. I know what you're probably thinking. What? How have I not heard of a movie with that cast? Well, you were probably too busy watching The Jungle Book or Barbershop: The Next Cut. You know, the good movies that came out that week. Boy, oh boy, was Criminal a disaster. The plot is as follows. A secret agent played by Ryan Reynolds is killed by a cyber terrorist when on a super important mission. So the dude in charge, Gary Oldman, desperate to complete the mission, taps the shoulder of a scientist, Tommy Lee Jones, and pretty much forces him to use experimental technology to implant the memories of the dead secret agent into the mind of a mentally handicapped death row convict played by Kevin Costner because science. Of course, because this plot can only exist if every person involved acts as stupid as possible, Kevin Costner gets free, but is haunted by Ryan Reynolds' memories and turns around to help the idiot CIA agents because, of course, he has a heart of gold buried deep, deep down. This sort of nutty action movie with a preposterous sci-fi conceit is exactly the sort of bonkers entertainment I love. Anybody else reminded of Face Off from that premise? I know I sure am, and I love Face Off. But the whole thing is lumbering with expository dialogue about science of mind swapping, terribly boring and uninterested characters wandering around this hoot of a plot with the straightest of faces, constantly expressing pathos like they're in a high art blockbuster, and this plot only strings along because everybody involved is the stupidest person on the planet. Gary Oldman's CIA agent is the biggest numbskull idiot who makes the stupidest decisions at every corner, and nobody calls him on his crap, nor does anybody acknowledge what he's doing is imbecilic. So it's like the movie thinks if he yells long and loud enough, then we'll take him seriously. But we don't. Because he's a moron. Kevin Costner is committed, but his character is so obnoxious, annoying, and morally bankrupt that any redemption he goes through is meaningless. The big revelation of where the MacGuffin is reveals that Ryan Reynolds is an idiot secret agent and a terrible husband and father. On top of all that, the action sucks, Gal Gadot continues to prove she cannot act to save her life, the mystery element is a tedious slog, and the thing reeks of thinking it's better than it is. The bad guy's codename is Heimdall because he's looking to bypass any secure gate, and the MacGuffin's called the Dutchman. Seriously. Criminal, you suck and deserve to make the bottom 10 of this bad year. Number 9. Animated features, generally speaking, were largely well received this year. I was lukewarm on the subgenre as a whole. While I liked Finding Dory, I wasn't as big on Kubo and the Two Strings as most people, was mostly annoyed by storks and trolls, and the wildlife, Norm of the North, and Ratchet and Clank just barely missed this list by the skin of their teeth. The only animated features I thought were really great were Zootopia and Moana. Nothing pushes my buttons and gets under my skin quite like a bad animated movie. So loud, so fast, so abrasively intrusive. It's like an assault on your senses for a full 90 minutes, and not in a good way like Mad Max Fury Road. But Norm of the North, The Wildlife, and Ratchet and Clank could all hail their new god emperor of terrible animation. Ice Age Collision Course. Talk about the law of diminishing returns with the Ice Age franchise. Can you believe Collision Course is the 5th in this hopefully finished franchise? The core trio of Ray Romano's Manny the Mammoth, John Leguizamo's Sid the Sloth, and Dennis Leary's Diego the Sabretooth return with the slew of side characters they've accumulated over the years, including Queen Latifah's She-Mammoth, Simon Pegg's Pirate Rodent on Uppers, those annoying twin things. I think Manny and She-Mammoth had a daughter? Adam Devine plays their daughter's boyfriend. I think he was here last time. Is he new? But there's even more new characters to love, like Jessie J as a she-sloth to be super horny for Sid, and that one guy from Modern Family as a drug-addicted llama. Oh yeah, remember Scrat? He's here too. He finds a flying saucer in the ice while he's trying to grab his nut, then ends up sending a meteor towards Earth to take us all out of the misery of watching another one of these stupid Ice Age movies, but of course now it's up to our main crew to try and stop it so they can keep adding stuffed animals to their ranks. They're not even really trying this time around, and the weird alternate history of the Ice Age universe doesn't make any sense. The dinosaurs live deep underground, but not like in the core of the Earth, like it's an entirely new habitat underground. The whole affair really feels lazy. The animation lacks a lot of texture you'd expect this day and age. Animated franchises from the early days of the computer animation era that are still around have stayed true to their visual designs while still maintaining impressive animation, like Toy Story. But not Ice Age. Most of the voice cast sounds either bored, like they recorded their lines over the phone, or, in Leary's case, like they were being recorded in their sleep. The only people that sound present are Adam Devine, who's giving an honest effort, and Simon Pegg, who it seems took a few lines of cocaine and just rambled on and on and on, and they just animated the character around the voice performance. Why am I still talking about this? Nobody watched it, and they were right not to. Ice Age Collision Course sucks, and it's the 9th worst movie I saw in 2016. Number 8. Whew, the blockbusters of the summer movie season were letdowns, weren't they? There's going to be a couple on this list, and the first is also among the treasured video game adaptation camp, Duncan Jones's unfortunate misfire Warcraft. This apparently made enough money overseas to compensate for its disastrous domestic returns, enough so that they're allegedly moving forward with a sequel. I sure hope not, because based on this laborious homework of a movie, we'd just be going back to square one. Why? Because this movie is a cinematic exercise in taking 2 hours to draw a circle. To be completely honest, there's a lot about this movie I don't remember, because the one thing I do remember is the feeling I had when I left. Bewilderment, confusion, frustration, anger. I mean, what changes when you get to the end of this? There's still a power mad orc magician overlord, exactly like at the beginning of the movie. There's still a stupid magic dude on the top of a mountain, exactly like at the beginning of the movie. Yes, it's a different stupid magic dude on the top of the mountain, but these characters are so interchangeable it doesn't even matter. There's still a boring king, exactly like at the beginning of the movie. Yes, it's a different boring king, but these characters are so interchangeable it doesn't even matter. These people are still at war, exactly like at the beginning of the movie. Oh, this time it's with the dwarves, humans, and elves are all united against the orcs, but they were already in alliance, so it didn't change. Ugh! This movie was so stupid! In the end, nothing mattered. Effectively, nothing happened. If your response to this is, nothing changing in the end is a commentary on the nature of warfare, then let me ask you this. Point to anything in this movie that supports that claim. I felt so embarrassed for poor Paula Patton, who is straddled with a character that doesn't get to go anywhere. The action is so clunky, slow, and lumbering that falls flat both as an entertainment and dramatic level. Ben Foster actually gives a bad performance. The editing goes bonkers in the third act on where geographically certain characters are that contradict one another. But there are some good things, I suppose. Toby Kebbell as the main orc continues to give solid performances in bad movies, and it at least commits to its vision. The problem is the vision just hits the ground with a deafening thud. There's a risk when you commit to these kinds of fantasy worlds. Sometimes you get The Lord of the Rings, most times you get Warcraft. The visual design doesn't work in this cinematic outing, but hey, maybe the sequel will turn me around. Number 7. How bad does a big budget summer blockbuster have to be to make it on a list that Dirty Grandpa was too good to make? There's an old saying about filmmaking that goes as follows. When you're making a movie, you end up making 3 movies. The movie you write, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit. I like this saying because it breaks down filmmaking into 3 fundamental elements: writing, direction, and editing. While most people will jump on bad writing and the elements of bad direction like weak performances and lazy storytelling, bad editing is something people tend to not really discuss, and I get told I'm nitpicking when I complain about bad editing. But editing is such an integral piece in the art of filmmaking, and when one of the biggest studio releases of the year, a movie that was released to 4,255 theaters for its opening weekend and cost $175 million, so horrendously botches one of the fundamental film elements, it's kind of inexcusable. But on top of the nightmarish editing, there was no saving Suicide Squad from being a bad movie. I cannot believe what is happening with Warner Brothers DC comic book movies right now. It's a dumpster fire right now, and all this movie needed to be was a passable little action movie. But instead, what we got was a bloated picture with disappointingly thin characterization of characters with rich comic book counterparts, dull, repetitive, and poorly realized action sequences, and editing so terrible the plot elements become so jumbled, placing importance on the wrong things and not enough emphasis on things which become important, overcomplicating things like the basic premise in 4 expository scenes placed one after the other. Oh, it's so bad. I know I'm not special when I point this sort of thing out, The movie's only been on home release for a few months, and there's already video after video breaking down the monstrous editing problems with Suicide Squad. Throw in the worst villain in recent comic book movie memory, yes, even including Doctor Doom from Fantastic and Malekith from Thor the Dark World, and Jared Leto playing Jim Carrey, playing the mask, doing an imitation of a 1950s gangster and calling it the Joker, and you've solidified a memorable disaster. I don't mean to turn this into a stupid Marvel vs. DC pissing contest, mostly because I really don't care because I'm not 16 anymore, but as much as I don't care for the earlier films in the MCU, I at least liked the first Iron Man out of those first 3 movies. With the first 3 installments in this DCEU, the best is Man of Steel, and that movie is bad. I don't have a lot of hope for Wonder Woman, and I've pretty much come to the conclusion that Justice League is going to suck. I would very much like to be wrong about that. So yeah, DC, get your stuff together. Loud, stupid, and the worst edited wide release film I've ever seen, Suicide Squad is sitting pretty comfortable at number 7 on the worst movies of 2016. Number 6. Faith-based movies are generally a reliable source for terrible entertainment, but the Christian propaganda faith-based movies I saw were generally of mixed in quality. Risen wasn't bad, but not really that good either. Miracles from Heaven was a harmless Sunday afternoon with Grandma. The Young Messiah was thoroughly forgettable, but not without ideas, and I didn't see I'm Not Ashamed or Believe. But Hacksaw Ridge was a really good war drama about faith, and Silence was great. But those two were clearly on a different level than the rest. But while the landscape of Christian movies wasn't as painful as you'd think, there was still a product of this film corner that reminded me just how bad, wrong-headed, cheap, and stupid the worst of this subgenre can be. I am, of course, speaking about God's Not Dead 2, a courtroom drama that's a sequel to a movie I never saw, and never want to. As somebody who identifies with the Christian faith, it's frustrating that I have to watch movies made, or at least written, by people who clearly don't seem to understand the ideas behind what Christianity is. It's so strange that this movie treats our Christian heroes as helpless and persecuted by evil atheists that won't sleep until the last flames of religion are stomped out. Why? Not only do these filmmakers not understand Christianity, they don't understand what atheism is. They don't understand people or the way the general public approaches religion. It's so frustrating that these people are identifying an enemy against we poor persecuted Christians, the evil, powerful atheists. This movie is about Melissa Joan Hart as a Christian high school history teacher at a secular school, who, in a lecture about the teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, answers a question from a student about the similarities between their teachings and those of Jesus Christ. After this, there's a lawsuit involving poor Ray Wise as an evil atheist prosecution attorney to permanently end Christian as we know it, or something to that effect. They're going to put God on trial. Then the movie becomes a circus of a debate that the screenwriters and filmmakers don't seem to understand either side of, because then Melissa Joan Hart and her hunky defense lawyer throw the whole concept of their argument out the window in favor of proving that Jesus did exist. And then they prove that Jesus did exist, and the evil atheists tuck their tails between their legs as the world continues to believe in God. Their complex attempt to cover up the truth has failed. This is so dumb. First of all, no rational person is arguing that Jesus didn't exist. He did. This is a matter of historical fact. The argument is whether or not he was the Messiah. Second, it's so obvious the writers wrote themselves into a corner they didn't know how to get out of, so they just flipped the table and decided to do something easy. It sucks Ray Wise had to be in this. I'm just glad he's got Twin Peaks Season 3 coming in May. All the atheists are evil, abusive, and get cancer. The acting is stale, the direction is twice as stale, the screenplay is broken, and there are several extraneous subplots that are only here because this is a sequel, I guess. Be sure to buy the new Newsboys CD after sticking after the credits. God's Not Dead 2 sucks, and is the 6th worst movie I saw in 2016. I would call it the dumbest movie of the year, but I just quite wasn't. Number 5. It seems Christian movies, as bad as they usually are, still seem to have a leg up on video game adaptation movies. They still haven't made a good one. How bad do these things have to be where Ratchet and Clank was the best of the three that came out last year? The one I thought would be the best turned out to be the worst, which sucks because I was kinda hopeful for Assassin's Creed. Produced and starring Michael Fassbender, one of my three favorite actors in the business right now? A supporting cast comprised of Marion Cotillard, Jeremy Irons, Charlotte Rampling, and Brenton Gleeson? Spanish Inquisition era action scenes? How could this possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, it could go disastrously so. I actually fell asleep for about 10 minutes during my 3D showing of Assassin's Creed, and I don't feel like I missed anything. In fact, I could have slept on and off for about 20 more minutes, and I would have been fine. What a nightmare of a cinematic experience. For somebody who is producing, starring, brought on the director, and a lot of the cast, Michael Fassbender looks dead behind the eyes and trapped in something he knows isn't working. Everybody seems to be giving the same dead, cold performance while that overmixed droning musical score pulses in your ear. Endless expository dialogue about this world's mythology, constant close-ups and claustrophobia-inducing cinematography that are very apparent in their attempts to cover up budgetary restraints, weak wire work, weaker green screen effects, and mind-numbingly tedious and confusing action scenes make Assassin's Creed a maddening watch. For a movie that's trying to make a franchise out of a hot property like the Assassin's Creed video games, you'd think there'd be more energy, more kinetic motion, more anything. Instead, this turkey was dead on arrival, reminding me more of those terrible Ron Howard adaptations of those Dan Brown books rather than an immersive game. I would call this the dumbest movie of the year, but it just quite wasn't. Number 4. Hey, you know what's worse than being reminded of those terrible Ron Howard adaptations of Dan Brown books? Watching one of those terrible Ron Howard adaptations of a Dan Brown book starring Tom Hanks. And 2016 gave us one of those with Inferno, the worst of the three we've received. I hadn't seen The Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons before 2016, so I took it upon myself to do my homework, and it was like watching 5 movies instead of 2. These movies suck. They're exhausting, and they're all the same. How many assumed acquaintances have to turn out to be bad guys before Robert Langdon finally catches on? How many second acts do we have to end with the, oh, this is where I'm thinking the thing is, except wait, now that I'm here, I just realized the thing is actually over there, moment before we run out of ideas? How many shots of Tom Hanks running while explaining the plot can Ron Howard conjure up before giving it a rest? The alleged genius just looks like a moron. Ironically, this time around, Robert Langdon has a head wound because that's exactly how I would describe this film. A gaping head wound of a mystery thriller. Honestly, I'm supposed to buy that Ben Foster and Tom Hanks can fill the same suit size? Yeah, right. So many things don't add up. So many coincidences and conveniences propelling the plot. So many revelations and plot details that feel goofy and out of place with Ron Howard's style. At just over 2 hours, this is the shortest installment in the series, but man does it feel like the longest. Maybe that's because I had to take breaks while watching the other 2 movies, but I was feeling restless by the 3rd act, squirming in my seat. I was just ready for this thing to finally be over. Not to mention, Howard's directorial efforts are lazy. Unlike the other 2 movies in this series, it actually feels like Ron Howard doesn't want to be there and is phoning it in. There are countless close-ups, and the full 16:9 aspect ratio makes this whole affair look dirt cheap and made for TV. What a waste of a talented cast, too. Omar Sy, Ben Foster, Felicity Jones, Irfan Khan, and Tom Hanks could have been doing any number of projects instead of this joyless dud. Inferno is a convoluted mess of a mystery. But what isn't a mystery is that Inferno is my pick for the 4th worst movie of 2016. I would call it the dumbest movie of the year, but it just quite wasn't. Number 3. Another year, another Nicholas Sparks adaptation. While 2015's The Longest Ride wasn't a good movie, in fact, it was pretty bad, it was a harmless, forgettable little romance movie that did its duty in filling out an April weekend opening before Furious 7 and other early pre-summer blockbusters hit. In 2016, just in time for Valentine's Day, The Choice hit theaters, and I was dumbfounded at how damaging of a romance was at the core of this film. The basic plot of the generically titled The Choice is a cocky, hunky vet, as an animal doctor, gets new neighbors, played by Teresa Palmer and Tom Welling. Tom Welling goes out of town for a period of time, so Teresa Palmer cheats on her fiancé, and she and the hunk have an affair. Tom Welling comes back, and she dumps the hunky vet. But, oh my god, she realizes just how much she really loved the hunky vet. He's super hunky, he has a boat, and his dog likes to hump her dog. So they get back together, she dumps Tom Welling, and they have a life together. It's really that simple. There isn't any exploration of how the scenario weighs on the morals and ethics of our characters. There isn't any discussion of finding true love after you've already committed yourself to someone. So as a result, I'm only left with two shallow, horrible people that want to get their rocks off because they're both hot. This is made even worse in the back half when all the sentimental crap hits the fan and we're asked to really care about their relationship and what each other means to the other. She gets into a coma, a hurricane comes through their house, I think there's cancer with the vet's dad, played by Tom Wilkinson, although I may be mixing that up with another Nicholas Sparks movie. None of it resonates on any level because these two central characters are deplorable, morally bankrupt scumbags. I hated the choice and would put it on the same level of awful as 50 Shades of Grey. Absolutely terrible, and the third worst movie of 2016. Number 2. It's nothing new when a new spoof movie comes out and it's generally terrible and no one likes it. Not only is the golden age of spoof movies over, but it seems like there are no good spoof movies anymore. But hey, if somebody decided to make a parody of an unprecedented cultural phenomenon that has no right to be one, like, say, 50 Shades of Grey, you'd expect, at the very least, it to be marginally better than its source material. Unfortunately, that somebody turned out to be Marlon Wayans, and his assault of a comedy, 50 Shades of Black, turned out to be just as bad as its source material. Hell, maybe it's even worse, and it managed to be just as bad or worse and be shorter. It feels like a million jokes are thrown at you every minute of 50 Shades of Black's runtime, and absolutely none of them are funny, creative, or remotely clever. The references to pop culture are outdated and have no place here. What does Whiplash have to do with 50 Shades of Grey? What relevance does Whiplash have over a year after its release? I love Whiplash, but not a whole lot of people have seen it. So how is the scene at all funny on its own terms? Is this stripper scene a reference to Magic Mike? I don't know, and I don't care, because it's not funny. The physical comedy also doesn't work, and is the lowest common denominator pratfalls, running into something, awkward humping, and people getting hit in the face by someone or by something. Also, the parody of 50 Shades of Grey element, i.e. the reason you're here, is woefully inconsistent in its approach, making the lack of continuity kill any momentum. It's a series of overlong gags linked together not because of any internal logic, but because this is sort of the way it happened in 50 Shades of Grey. Because there isn't a broader story at play, the comedy is meandering and actually kind of pointless. This guy doesn't look or sound like The Weeknd. He's just wearing a wig that looks like The Weeknd's hair. Not funny. Anna's roommate is loud white trash and they couldn't get Rebel Wilson. Not funny. Her butt is big because of implants, so when he spanks her she doesn't feel anything. Yet she feels it when he spanks her at the end. Not funny. She's a virgin, so she has a huge bush. Not funny. Hey, her bush knocked him over. Still not funny. Not a single laugh, not a single chuckle, not a single smile. The comedic vision is broken, and 50 Shades of Black is the second worst movie of 2016. I would call it the dumbest movie of the year, but it just quite wasn't. Number 1. Alright. We finally made it. At long last, we've reached the worst movie of this garbage year, and I can finally wipe my hands clean of this crap. The worst movie of the year is an orgy of terrible special effects of all kinds with a visual design that is broken. I am, of course, speaking about Alex Proyas's Gods of Egypt. I know what you're probably thinking. Isn't that movie so bad it's good? It's funny, right? Well, I would very much like to back that sentiment, but I just hated watching this movie too much to like it ironically. Troll 2, this is not. I'm not going to say this movie sucks because it's got a thin, convoluted plot. It does. But the whole plot is really an excuse to explore this fantasy world and assemble an elaborate cast of characters along the way. This is, of course, what makes this experience so sucky. The characters at the center of this adventure are generically bland. I blame the actors, but they're given nothing to work with, and the direction isn't doing them any favors. We meet one god after the next in a tedious exercise of patience, so uninteresting, and practically interchangeable if not for the half-heartedly inserted quirks. These characters are ciphers. They're zeros. Plus, the world they're inhabiting is the least compelling of the fantasy worlds I've seen since Seventh Son. It's that much of a creative wasteland. So because the characters and world the plot hinges on are so vacuous, that makes the plot being so generic that much worse. Gods of Egypt is a drama-free zone, which is pretty stupid considering this is a pantheon of gods. If melodrama and soap opera were ever in need, then it's here. But no, it's all about the special effects and exploration of this world, this creative wasteland vacuum that is Egypt, I guess. How fittingly ironic is it that the world in this movie is literally flat? Poor Jeffrey Rush and Chadwick Boseman, how did they get roped into this mess? The action sequences are nonsensical, the rules keep changing to contrive any sort of emotional response from the audience. It's actually kind of something to behold, something where every single creative decision falls flat on its face. It's almost something you need to see to believe. Almost. It's the worst movie of the year, and yeah, it's the dumbest. And that'll do it for me on this list of best and worst movies of 2016. What are your guys' lists? Sound off below in the comments, and as always, thank you very much for watching.